It's Monday, the 8th of February 2021. Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Headlines, the business news you need in just 5 minutes. I'm Sean Aylmer. Today's headlines: Australians spent $350 billion in the shops last year, and the biggest surge came in purchases of alcohol, while people held back on buying new clothes. Plus, share markets in Australia and the US record their best week in months. Canberra claims Google has backed down on its threat to quit Australia, and expats to come home as the states ramp up the quarantine system. Australians spent $350 billion in the shops or online last year. That's a 6% jump on 2019. And the greatest surge came in alcohol. Well, it was a tough year. Liquor retail sales were up by more than 25%, taking the total turnover to $16 billion. The other big increases came in toys, games and entertainment and hardware retailing, according to CommSec. All of them were items in demand during lockdowns. At the other end of the spectrum, sales on clothes last year were down 8%. Shoes were nearly 10% lower, and newspaper and book turnover was off 12%. But the biggest losers last year were, not surprisingly, cafes and restaurants, where turnover was down 25%. Overall, around $125 billion of the $350 billion, or 35%, was spent in supermarkets and grocery stores. Department stores, once the kings of the mall, attracted just 5% of sales, showing the demise of that category. The data comes from the latest Bureau of Statistics retail sales figures, which show a 4.1% fall in December after a 7% surge in November. Retail sales are up nearly 10% from a year earlier. That's a huge gain. A large chunk of the fall in December reflected the bring forward of turnover to the Black Friday sales in November. In overseas news, Wall Street rose on Friday night with the S&P 500 and Nasdaq having their best weeks since November. The three big factors were the vaccine rollout, strong earnings for the December quarter, and hopes that a stimulus package was close. Both indices closed at record highs. The new US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has warned China that it will be held accountable for its abuses and Washington would stand up for democratic values. His counterpart, Yang Jiechi, who is China's top foreign policy official, said no one can stop the rejuvenation of the great China nation. Let the games begin. And large protests were held in Myanmar over the weekend to denounce the military coup in that country and the detaining of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. An Australian academic, Sean Turnell, has also been detained. Mr. Turnell, who is based at Macquarie University and has worked with Aung San Suu Kyi for many years, was detained by the military while recording a phone interview with the BBC. Sean's a friend of mine, and he ain't no revolutionary, but he is a passionate believer in democracy for Myanmar. Locally, the Australian share market had its best week in 3 months, adding 1.1% on Friday, taking the full week's rise to 3.5%. Tech stocks had a particularly good week. The S&P/ASX All Technology Index was up 7.5% for the week to a record high, led by heavyweights Afterpay and REA. Afterpay share price closed above $150 a share for the first time on Friday. It's up almost 300% over the past year. An online property group REA closed at a record high as well, after recording a 13% jump in profit for the December half year. Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg believes Google won't quit Australia if the government introduces new laws that will force the social media giant to pay media companies for content. Mr. Frydenberg said after talks with Sundar Pichai, the chief executive of Alphabet, that's the parent company of Google, the group had recommitted to Australia and the government had recommitted to the code. Google doesn't want to leave Australia, and the government doesn't want Google to leave either, because it would be politically unpalatable given how many small businesses rely on the search engine. There are media reports this morning that if the government decides to set a target of reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, it will carve out the agricultural industry, similar to what New Zealand has done. The National Party is pushing for the exclusion. In case you didn't know it, cows are big emitters of carbon. State and territory leaders have agreed to lift state-based hotel quarantine caps and expand accommodation at the Howard Springs facility near Darwin in an effort to get more stranded Aussies home from overseas. Already 211,000 people have been through the quarantine system, but there are still thousands trying to get home. The federal and state leaders agreed to continue with the hotel quarantine system. Off-the-plan apartment sales are making a comeback, according to a report in the Financial Review, with investors encouraged by rising prices. The report says agents in Brisbane, Perth and Melbourne said off-the-plan purchases were strong in part due to government concessions. Meanwhile, it was a very strong weekend for auctions, buoyed by comments last week from the Reserve Bank that interest rates were on hold until 2024. Buyers were in the market and 80% of houses going to auction sold. It's the beginning of a big week for corporates. Profit season gets underway properly. Expect good numbers from the consumer sector, miners and the building sector. A couple of big results tomorrow includes Boral and Suncorp, followed on Wednesday by Commonwealth Bank and CSL. That's the Fear and Greed business headlines for today. Make sure you've hit subscribe so you don't miss out. There's also more in today's full Fear and Greed podcast, including an interview with market analyst Matthew Kidman about the companies to watch this earnings season. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.